$124 trillion is set to change hands in the next 20 years. But a lot of people aren't talking about it. That's why today we're going to talk about why families aren't talking about inheritance, the disconnect between parents and adults, plus how to get the conversation started to protect your wealth and relationships. 124 trillion. That's a number that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around.
It's a hard number to imagine, $124 trillion changing hands. And one interesting note is about half of that 124 trillion already lies with baby boomers. So what baby boomers are going to see is a whole lot of money coming to them. They already have a whole lot of money. Now, how do they transition that? How do they use it to the best that they can and then transition it on to their kids and their grandkids?
The baby boomers are going to be transitioning it on. And here's what it kind of looks like. Again, the estimation or the projection of the next 20 years, the people that are going to be getting the most of that money is millennials. So that's those born from 1981 to 1996, about 46 trillion. Then Gen X, that's 1965 to 1980. Then Gen Z, 15 trillion. And then you see baby boomers, only 6 trillion, because right now it's the next 20 years. So we're looking out at this, but very interesting too, Clint, who's going to be receiving that money.
Yeah, you can imagine that a lot of baby boomers are still in line to inherit some money. So that likely is going to change hands from their parents to them, then from them to their kids. And that is actually a couple different exchanges. And a lot of times families just aren't talking about this. It can be uncomfortable. It's something that, just isn't always spoken of openly. But this is really something that highlights the importance of having these conversations so that those Gen Xers and those millennials are prepared for it when it does come, because it's on its way.
And according to Fidelity, 97% of families, so nearly everyone, says estate planning conversations are important. 70% of those in the study had created a will or an estate plan, but 68% had not shared inheritance details with children. And Loren, you've been doing this now for nearly 25 years. When it comes to sharing financial details with children, people are all over the place, and for good reason with this exactly.
Well, talking about money is hard. There's a lot of reasons people like to talk about money. There's a lot of reasons people don't like to talk about money. One thing we know for sure is everybody has an estate, which means everybody needs to have an estate plan. How do you handle the assets now? How do you handle the assets when you transition it on? You need to talk about this stuff to your spouse if you're married to make sure that you guys are on the same page. Whether or not you communicate to your kids, that is a different story. We have families, and this is anecdotal, I'm glad you referenced the stats, 68% say they don't really talk about it. In our conversations, what we notice is a lot of the baby boomers are open to having conversations with their kids. But what they tell us is their parents almost all the time don't want to talk about it. And I think so there's a generational difference between people wanting to communicate about it, not wanting to communicate about it. It'll be interesting to see how the baby boomers' kids, the Gen X, the Gen Ys, handled this type of topic, the topic of money.
Yeah, because their parents, generally the silent generation, I believe is what that generation is called, the Depression era. They were born in the Depression. Maybe money is something they didn't want to talk about. So the next generation does it differently, and every household does it differently. And Clint, you've also seen, though, when you don't talk about it, there can be some drawbacks.
Yeah, we really, there's a lot of discussion on relationships and communication, how important that is. If there's a void, if there's a space where someone isn't clearly communicating, oftentimes negativity can fill that. And so that's the importance of having clear communication so that there isn't a lot of people that are left wondering, what did they want to have happen from a legacy standpoint? Why did they do what they did? And the more clear they can be in communication to help their beneficiaries understand why they made the decisions that they made and what is potentially on the horizon for them, the more kind that can be.
And imagine this, generations not being on the same page. I mean, I'm always on the same page with my kids.
Always.
You and Jace are always on the same page.
Yeah, we were just talking about how we always agree on everything. It's so weird.
We're both raising teenagers, so we know what it's like to not be on the same page with your child. And this is happening with this wealth transfer as well. Here's what the statistics are saying. 95% of adult children say they're ready to manage inherited wealth. but 25% of parents disagree. And I know that when you guys sit down in visits with people, they do say to you, I'm concerned about what them knowing and maybe not working as hard, and the psychological aspects of this inheritance really come into play.
Yeah, there's so many reasons why families maybe haven't clearly communicated. Something that we hear a lot is, I don't want my kids to be dependent on this money because it might not be there, things could change, and they don't communicate because they don't necessarily maybe even know what that is going to look like. And that's where the importance of the plan really comes in, where they can clearly see what's likely to be present across their lifetime, plan for different scenarios. What if one of them passes away? What if long-term care comes in? And making sure that they're ready for all those what ifs in their plan. And then that will help give them more clear insight on what they maybe should be sharing with their kids.
Parents can also feel an increased level of pressure when they communicate to their kids how much money they have. The kids might take that and be like, I'm going to receive a whole bunch of money from mom and dad. And now mom and dad's thinking, well, there's a whole lot of time left in your retirement. A lot of things can happen. Are you going to use this money for long-term care, other health concerns? You don't really know how much money is going to be left in a lot of cases. So over-communicating sometimes can increase the pressure on parents.
Here's one more stat from Fidelity that speaks to that. 76% of adult children want to know if they're named beneficiaries, and only 35% of baby boomers feel a need to tell them. So I think the takeaway of today's show is whether you want to tell your children or not, that's clearly up to you. But planning either way is going to make for a better transition. So whether you just plan and you don't tell them, or you plan and tell them, that's good. But not planning at all, that's when you can really see some of these missteps.
Yeah, and I think that's what oftentimes families find is if they don't have a comprehensive retirement plan for themselves, they probably really don't know what to talk to their kids about because they haven't been able to see that for themselves, see the different impact of the decisions that they make in their working career and in their retirement, and then really what those outcomes can be. Once they have a more clear plan, they can see that clear direction, that clear roadmap, then often they know, hey, we know what we could tell our kids. How we do that is certainly up to personal preferences.
Clint's heading over to the board in just a minute to give us a real world example. And I just want to let everyone know we did change the name of the couple, some of their identifying details. Clint, we're going to call the couple Joe and Jane. Is that right? Joe and Jane, you really helped them see their legacy plan and then maximize it.
Yeah, and they really were feeling like they were on the right track, but it just felt like they needed more. They wanted to do some more advanced planning. And so some of the things that we were able to help them uncover was just more specific details about their situation. And as we started to build out their plan, one of the things that we were able to clearly see is that they were not spending down their portfolio across their retirement. They were actually on track to leave somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million to their beneficiaries, all in the pre-tax bucket. And so as we start to think about that, well, now when those dollars transfer from Joe and Jane to their kids, that $2 million becomes taxable at their kids' tax bracket, not at theirs. And that's a very big shift when you start to think about the impact of that $2 million, $1 million per child. So let's say they have a daughter and they have a son, each of them would receive $1 million pre-tax. Now, as we started to help Joe and Jane, as we further built out their plan, one of the things that we were able to uncover was just kind of what tax bracket they were in versus what tax brackets were available to them further down the road. So we took into consideration their Social Security, their pension, equate for the standard deduction. Both of them are over 65, so they had the senior bonus of an extra $12,000 of a deduction. We found that their taxable income was right around $44,000 per year. And that was likely to be the case for the next several years. Well, when they started to think about that, what they were starting to realize and uncover was, I'm pretty sure that's lower than where our kids are. And so between one visit to the next, they actually said, hey, I think we're going to go ask them where they're at. Communication lines that maybe have never really been open before, but as they started to build more advanced planning, they realized the importance of having those conversations. So they went and asked their kids, and they knew it was high. They were actually surprised, but both of their kids were up in the 30% tax bracket range. And so this really started to give them more clarity, because what they were able to uncover was, now we realize we have opportunities to pay some tax on our tax bill rather than have that go to our kids, where they're going to be in a much higher tax range. So if we think about that $1 million per beneficiary, those kids would, because of the Secure Act changes, they can't stretch that IRA out for their lifetime. They actually have a 10-year time frame that they have to have that money out and the tax bill paid within. So you think about that $1 million per beneficiary, account for some growth over 10 years. What we find is that would be around $127,000 per year per beneficiary that they would have to take out and stack on top of their existing household income. Now you can quickly realize that that's going to be taxed at a high level. And our projections showed that they'd likely to be in that 35% tax bracket federally on those dollars they would receive in the inherited IRA. They also live in states that have taxation on inherited IRAs. There's about 10 that are up in that 10% range. Unfortunately, the kids are in one of those and don't really have a lot of intentions of leaving. There's about 10 states where there wouldn't be any tax at all statewide on an inherited IRA. So this gets to the importance of understanding the tax laws in the state, not only where you live, but also where your beneficiaries live. And so when they started to look at this, they said, well, we know we're in the 12% tax bracket. Our kids would be paying 45% on all the dollars that they inherit in those inherited IRAs. And that started to uncover some strategies that this family was able to implement. So when you think about that $1 million per beneficiary, if it's taxed at 45% and there's some growth over those 10 years, we'd likely see each beneficiary with a tax bill of around $570,000. On the $2 million of pre-tax IRA for this family, that'd be about a $1.14 million tax bill that their family would face. Well, this family, as they're starting to think more about this, they're kind of getting excited because they actually know there's opportunities in this, which would be for them to actually think about Roth conversions in their lifetime. And first and foremost, these Roth conversions actually benefit their plan, but have that added benefit of making their legacy plan even stronger and more tax efficient. In this particular case, Joe and Jane have about 8 years before they reach required minimum distributions. And knowing that they're in the 12% tax bracket, they can fill that up and actually go up in the 22% bracket to the point where they're not going to have to pay any more for their Medicare premium. That was something that was really important to them. That actually opens the door over 8 years for them to move about $1 million from pre-tax to Roth. Once those dollars are in that Roth bucket, they're going to grow tax-free, pass on tax-free. Added benefit is their kids can actually keep those dollars in the Roth IRA for 10 more years once they inherit it. The impact of this is immense. With Joe and Jane's particular situation, if they fill up the 12% bracket partway up in 22, they'd have an effective or an average rate of what they'd pay on those dollars of about 18% to shift it from pre-tax to Roth. And they know that that is going to be a really good opportunity versus you think about their beneficiaries who would be paying 45% on those dollars somewhere down the road. So Joe and Jane get really excited. They can see clearly how Roth conversions and the amount that they're converting impacts their plan as well as their beneficiaries. And when you start to add this all up across that total over the 10 years, this would actually lead to each beneficiary saving about $225,000 in tax by Joe and Jane being more advanced in their planning and more proactive with this. A total of $450,000 saved off of that total inheritance tax bill. A huge impact.
Many people like Joe and Jane in their situation, it's not uncommon over the course of their retirement for them to save 6 figures off of their retirement tax bill. That doesn't even include the example that you gave there, passing their assets, whatever is left, onto their kids. So not only can that type of planning benefit Joe and Jane while they're alive, because with that kind of pre-tax savings at age 73 or 75, whenever their RMD age is, that's going to take them over that 12% tax bracket anyway. That tax bracket, 12% tax bracket, is very favorable. So them realizing you guys planning to use that while they're alive not only can help them while they're alive save a bundle off of their retirement tax bill, but as you can see, it can save them a bundle off their estate and the inheritance tax just by using the 12% tax bracket while they're alive to not push their kids up into a higher tax bracket in their highest wage earning years.
When we looked at some of those numbers, yeah, some people can completely relate to those numbers. Other people might have looked at that and gone, wait, their kids are in the 30% tax bracket. Maybe my kids aren't there, or maybe I don't know what tax bracket my kids are in.
These strategies can still be really impactful. Whether you really want to say that you have an estate plan or not, you do. That's going to play out by state law. It's going to be under the IRS and how they govern these things. And so it's really important to understand what that means to you during your retirement, what that can potentially mean to your beneficiary. And you don't maybe need to know exactly what bracket they're in, but we regularly hear from parents who say, hey, our kids are doing better than we've ever done. They're likely in a higher tax bracket than you might be in retirement, which opens the door for those strategies, even if they're not in the 30% range, or even if they don't live in some of those states that are going to tax inherited IRAs at a high level like this particular case did.
Loren, I wonder sometimes too if people think, hey, I've got an estate plan, or what we like to call a legacy plan. My beneficiaries are all taken care of, they're all up to date. But this example that Clint just gave us is why it's so much more than beneficiaries.
Yeah, and sometimes people think, like in that example with Joan and Jane, where they have $2 million that they plan on passing on. That's not me. Everybody has an estate. It's just not everybody has an estate plan that is actually yours. If you don't put together an estate plan, the plan is going to be the state that you live in. The state of Iowa has an estate plan for you. You just want to make sure that it is your plan. That's why we designed the Retire Secure Roadmap, which is our comprehensive written retirement plan. And there's 6 pillars in this roadmap. We have the lifestyle pillar. That's the stuff that you dream about living in retirement. And then we have the 5 financial pillars that enable you to live that lifestyle pillar: the income, tax, investments, legacy, and healthcare pillars. All 5 of those help you live that lifestyle pillar and all make up that Retire Secure roadmap.
And we do work with a lot of families in Iowa, but you don't have to go all the way to California or Oregon to find that higher and that very different way that they tax things from a state level on retirement income. You can just look at, Nebraska is very different, Minnesota is very different. And so those are all things that you want to be thinking more about, not just what the laws are in your state, but potentially as you start to think more advanced, what that could look like for your beneficiaries as well.
So the Great Wealth Transfer is how we started this show. And it was all about some families communicate, some don't. Kids want to know things, parents don't want to tell. There's a disconnect there. And some families we know are very connected. You talk to a lot of families that are super transparent with all of this. And I think you just had a Retire Ready call recently where the child hopped on with mom.
Yeah, it's not uncommon that somebody might want to get their kids involved or even their parents involved as something that we see. Hey, I want to help my parents make sure they're doing everything right. They don't necessarily know where to go for resources, but what they're doing isn't working. And so that's something that we are happy to explore more what that looks like. And we invite families. If you want to bring your kids along, great. We would love to show them as much as you want. Sometimes they don't want to show them everything. Sometimes they want to let them know exactly what things are like. We recently had an individual, and she brought her daughter in, and as we started to map out the plan for her, what her daughter said was, "Mom, retire. Why aren't you retiring? Your plan looks phenomenal." And even in this case, she was saying, hey, as you're building out those scenarios, as our team was working to do, why don't you show my mom spending a little bit more money? And she's saying, Mom, now we can go and do that travel. We can do those trips together. She's like, I'd rather have you do that, spend it in your lifetime, rather than something that you pass on further down the road. So those can be some really meaningful, really relationship building conversations when families start to invite their kids in, and that really starts to open those lines of communication.
Yeah, and our families can invite their kids in at any stage of the process. In that story, she invited her daughter in the creation of the plan. A lot of times people will be working with people for years, and it's not till the latter part of their retirement years that they decide they want to bring their kids in. That's up to you, whatever you want to do, but we really do enjoy that type of conversation. And by the way, that can look like anything you want it to look like, whether we show the kids the entirety of the plan, including all the financials and potential outcomes, or we just showed them what you want us to show them. There's a lot of tax ramifications that can come and a lot of confusion that can come from inheriting money. So maybe it's just a conversation of, we have a 401k that has never been taxed. We have a Roth IRA that has been taxed. Here's different things to consider with these different types of money. Whatever that looks like, whatever you're comfortable with, the important part is that you have a plan. It is effectively communicated while you're alive or after you're alive, and it does exactly what you want it to do.
And you mentioned meaningful conversations, and a meaningful conversation could help you get started on your legacy plan. A retirement planner might be the person to talk to. Here's an opportunity. It's our Retire Ready call. This is a complimentary call that you could schedule right now by going to retirereadycall.com. When you get there, you'll just see a calendar. It's pretty simple. You can choose a time and a day, and then you can have a conversation. And what I'm gathering from the conversations that you both have about legacy planning is it's less guessing. So I'm going back to the woman and the daughter, and they're going to travel now. They know that the money is there. They're not like, ooh, can we travel? If we do, will mom still be able to pay for long-term care later? They know because the plan has numbers around it, and it really just gave them that freedom to really, for mom to enjoy the first part of retirement, the go-go years.
And something we also see is the kids learn a lot from that. They see the things their parents have done really well, and they see the things their parents are thinking about in retirement. That can help them understand the importance of Roth, or the importance of beneficiary designations, or all those different aspects of the comprehensive retirement plan.
And that all got started with the Retire Ready call, which is what I really like about that call. It's simple, it's complimentary, it's extremely easy. The hardest part about retirement planning is getting started. Let's get started with the Retire Ready call.
You can go to retirereadycall.com right now. If you want to talk about legacy planning, great. If you have something else on your mind, our retirement planners will be happy to talk to you. This is Retiring Today, and we thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, click here for another video. Be sure to subscribe to get more engaging retirement planning content.